You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Happy post-election day to all those who celebrate. Did you do it? Did you vote? Will Democracy Santa put you on the good list for that primary vote, or will you get coal in your ballot box? Maybe you are the type who eagerly awaits each wave of even primary election results, or maybe it's something you've already forgotten about, moved on with your day. Regardless, pat on the back to everybody who made the time to turn in a ballot. And now we're going to make you question the way you formed your decisions on that ballot, especially if you asked, say, ChatGPT, Gemini, or Grok for elections information. Today, the University of Washington announced the results of a study looking at the potential influence artificial intelligence can have on our political decision-making. It's something that's coming up a lot these days as AI becomes more prevalent in our daily lives. So we want to know what exactly this new study found and if we should be worried about the results. Here to tell us more is researcher Jillian Fisher, a PhD candidate at the University of Washington and the lead author on that study on AI and political influence. Hi, Jillian. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell us the basics on this study. Who participated? What did you find?
Yeah, so in this study, we recruited self-reporting Democrats and Republicans in the US, across the US, and we had them complete tasks that, normal people might do with ChatGPT around political opinions and political decision makings. But unbeknownst to them, the model that they were interacting with could have been neutral or more left-leaning or conservative-leaning. And what we were looking at was, if you interact with these biased models, would it affect your decision-making or would it affect your opinions on certain political topics?
So you tweaked the models that they were interacting with. So this was a baseline ChatGPT as it exists in the world. And then how did you tweak the other two models?
Yeah, so exactly. We used the base ChatGPT, and then on the back end, we were able to kind of add a prefix to every input that the user gave to the model. And we basically said, answer this question as if you were a far right Republican or a far left Democrat. And that was added to every single input that the user gave to the model, but they didn't know that. It was all on the back end for us.
Can you compare some of the answers that a user would have gotten to a basic query about, whatever political question they had?
Yeah, so for example, one of the questions was learning more about obscure political topics. So something like covenant marriages, which is a more stricter form of marriage in certain states in the US. And so when giving it to the basic chat GPT, it might give you both sides. It would say, this is what covenant marriages is. This is how people feel about it on the left and the right. When we gave it to the biased models, when we said, answer this like a far right Republican, it then would just talk about the strengths of covenant marriages. And it was more supportive of it. And it wouldn't give that left side. It wouldn't give any idea of maybe why you wouldn't want to support it.
And you mentioned that these participants, they self-identified as being different parts of the political spectrum. How did you see the differently biased AI bots affect these participants? What did you see the effect as being?
Yeah, so this was the surprising part, is that regardless if you were self-identifying as Republican or Democrat, when you interacted with a bias model, whether that was in the same bias as you felt, so if you were Democrat and you were interacting with the liberal model, Republican interacting with the conservative model, or if it was switched, you tended to be influenced by the bias of the model. And this is really surprising because in political science, you normally don't find that people tend to cross that political divide, that they can be persuaded as easily. And you have to remember that this was only a few interactions, so 3 to 20 interactions with these language models, just a few minutes of talking with them on certain topics. And you were starting to see that people who self-identify one way would have opinions on the other side of the aisle.
And there were a couple different forms of influence, and I'm wondering if you could break it down. One seemed to be about introducing biased information. The chatbots would introduce biased information about a topic that somebody didn't know very much about. And then the other kind of influence seemed to have to do with the way that they prioritized things. Can you talk a little bit more about that and explain what you saw?
Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to look at both a direct task that people might do with these models and a more indirect task. So the first one, as I've kind of mentioned, was this idea of I don't know what this political topic is, and I'm going to go to ChatGPT to learn about it. So we gave them certain obscure political topics, and we said, use this model to learn more. And then after, we asked their opinion on it. So that was more of this direct task that you're talking about. This is the one with covenant marriages, where we would say, what's your opinion on this? They would go learn about it through the model that could be biased or not, and then we asked them, what was your opinion at the end? The second task was a little more indirect. So for this one, we asked them to pretend they were a mayor of a city and they had to allocate some leftover budget to four branches of government. And these four branches were strategically picked. So two of them are generally more supported by conservatives and two by liberals. And we had them give an initial allocation. So no interaction with the chat box. After they gave their initial allocation, that went to the chat box and it gave some commentary on it. And then they were able to interact with the model, understand the commentary more, and then change their final allocation. And we were looking at this change from having no interaction with the model to after interacting with the model. So a little bit more of an indirect task, where, as you said, they're somewhat ranking these branches through this budget allocation task.
And you saw a difference in where they would put the money, basically. And this is like a policy making exercise. And what kinds of changes did you see in terms of what they prioritized?
Exactly. So very similar to the first task, we found that when you interacted with a biased language model, you tended to change your allocation in a way that supported the branches that the model wanted you to support. So if it was a conservative model that you're interacting with, you would put more money into the conservative supported branches. And this was a very, very high effect. So we found effects on both of the tasks we asked the users to do, but we found a much higher effect on the second budget allocation.
Why did you do this study in the first place, Jillian? What were you most curious about?
Yeah, so when we started looking into this study, it was the time where AI models were becoming really prevalent in our daily life. Everyone was talking about it. My mom was saying how she was using them, to look up recipes or understand different topics. And hand in hand with that was this idea, this research that was coming out, that these models are biased in many different ways. Culturally, racially, politically, we were seeing bias throughout in the research side of AI. And it led me and my collaborators to want to understand, okay, we're using these models more. We know that they're biased, but are we actually affected by this bias? And that's kind of an assumption I think people were making that we wanted to go down and really understand. And on top of that, we wanted to also understand, is there ways to mitigate the effects? And that was something else that we was important in our study as well.
You did point out that people who were more familiar with AI tended, and this wasn't like a strong correlation, but tended to be slightly less influenced by the biased information that they were presented. So if they were conservatives interacting with a liberal AI, if they were Democrats, lefties interacting with a more conservative AI, if they were at all educated on AI issues, the influence was lessened a bit. Tell me more about that and what you make of it.
Yeah, so this was a really surprising and exciting finding in our study. And as you mentioned, we say that it's hypothesis generating. So there's some smoke here. We're just not sure if there's fire. But the idea is that if you understood how AI works more than the average person, then you seem to have less of an effect of these biased models, which could indicate to us a really robust way for users and for the general public to guard themselves against this bias that is inherently in these models. So currently in the world of AI, there's a lot of work being done on the technical side of reducing bias in AI. And that's incredibly important. However, because the way that we create models right now has many human touches, there will probably always be some aspect of bias in AI. And so another way that we could also be looking at to guardrail ourselves against this, against these effects and this influence, is more of a socio-technical approach. And that's what this was indicating, is that if we can educate people about how these models work, they're trained from the internet, therefore they might have stereotypes and bias. They're trained by humans who have stereotypes and bias. then understanding this could be a way that you can interact with any model, whether it's biased or not, and protect yourself against the influence.
I have to say, there's a couple ways that I read your study. One is it's terrifying that these AI chatbots are basically black boxes. We don't know the types of data that they have been trained on. And truly, when you talk about a large language model, it's an autocomplete. It is trying to come up with the most logical next answer to your question. This is not like, a thinking, reasoning entity that has, humanity's good in mind. However, when I hear that somebody approaches new information and changes their mind in a political context, I get kind of excited because we are so entrenched in our right and left biases and our right and left camps that typically if somebody approaches, say, a news article or they talk to a friend that they believe is on the other side of the political spectrum, they are totally shut down. They are not getting inputs that will actually sink in and change their mind generally. There's a slim, tiny bit of undecideds that might be swayed. But folks talking to these chatbots did seem to change their minds. Now, I don't think it's good that they didn't know they were being influenced or didn't realize they were talking to a chatbot that had a bias. But overall, is it okay that I actually had a hopeful reaction to your study, Jillian, that there are ways in which people can change their mind in a political context when presented with new information?
Yes, I love that you came away with that idea and those thoughts. Because what I don't want people to come away with is just being scared and frightened and afraid from the results of this study. And I think exactly what you said, it's two sides of the same coin. On one hand, yes, if you interact with the bias models, it could influence you, and people could see that as a bad or a scary thing, that you could be influenced unknowingly. But the other part of this is the idea that this could be a tool to really bridge these partisan divides and bring people together. And I do think there is research being done looking at using AI as a mediator, as a way to come in when you have two polarizing ideas and bring you closer together rather than farther apart. And so I'm really glad that you walked away with that idea. And I hope other people also see that. We talk about that in the paper. And it's something that I felt very hopeful about as well when doing this study. I think that and the idea that there are ways to mitigate this influence were important parts of the study that people walk away with.
However, I do predict that if we start having more education and maybe people are aware of inputs and biases, their old defenses, again, that people have up when they approach a certain kind of writing, news outlet, whatever they have preconceived ideas about, may come back up. So I don't mean to pour cold water on my theory about the hopefulness of being open-minded in this political sphere. Jillian, anything else you think people should know about this study or what you're curious about next when it comes to political influence from chatbots?
Yeah, so I think where we're going next is there's this very logical chain of thought we've gone through. We have AI models. We knew they were biased. We've now proven this idea that that bias gets translated downstream to the user. And the next branch is how do we mitigate these influences? So I mentioned before, looking at the technical side and the social technical side, this idea of AI education. And I think the third part of that is understanding that these are problems that have been looked at in many different domains and fields before. So we have media bias and we have media literacy, and this is a huge field of research and understanding. And when I was a kid growing up, we talked about media literacy in class. And so I think looking at AI, we have to remember that these challenges have been seen in other fields, and we can learn from them and we can grow based off what they've already done. Like we're already leagues ahead because of the research they've done. So I'm really interested in using more interdisciplinary research to move along as we try to figure out how to use this technology for good. What can it do that's more challenging for us, and how do we mitigate against that? So these are the things that I'm really interested in moving forward.
Jillian, when we started this conversation, you talked about how you were noticing AI being used in all kinds of facets of human life, like your mom using it for recipes. And I have seen that too. It's so quickly being integrated, and people are relying on this to go to the ballot box, to make decisions about how they're going to get their car fixed, whatever it might be, at all kinds of parts of our life. Do you think that education and media literacy can possibly keep up with how quickly these models are growing in importance in our lives?
So I think there's a difference between everyone understanding how they work, the mechanics, the algorithms, the architecture. That is going to be hard. I agree with you. Like that's moving at a pace that's even hard for me as an expert to keep up with. But what we're looking at moving forward is what types of information, what little nuggets of information might be enough to safeguard you. So you brought up in the interview today how it's trained on the internet, it's just a next word predictor. Those are small pieces of information that most people don't know. And so something that I'm really curious about is small things like that, just explaining to them that we take the internet and that's what it's learned on. Not telling you how we learn, how we train, what it is, the magic behind it, but just that small piece of information, is that enough to safeguard someone? I'm really hopeful that it is, and that's what we're looking at currently in current studies that we're working on. And so that's the hope, is that you don't need to know everything, but if you know just a little bit, could that be helpful? So we'll see.
Jillian Fisher is the lead author on a study looking at how chatbots can influence people's political decision making. Thank you so much for being here, Jillian.
Thanks for having me.
And we got to take a quick break. I would be interested to hear if anybody's using AI to inform their vote these days or to crunch information about candidates. If you have been using it, Soundside at KUOW.org is my email, or you can leave us a voicemail at 206-221-3213, 206-221-3213. Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.